Welcome back to 4547blog.com presents the New Conservative Radio Show. I'm your host, NINJ, and today's episode is about patterns, because as loud as politics feels right now, real power rarely shifts in a single dramatic moment. It moves quietly, structurally, and predictably, especially in these midterm elections. Every single time, every cycle, voters hear the same false comfort. This race is safe. This district is locked. This side has momentum. And every cycle, history proves how dangerous that thinking is. Midterms don't reward noise. They reward participation. They reward organization. And they punish complacency. So before we talk about the map, before we talk about momentum, before we talk about the voters or turnout and what 2026 is shaping up to be, we have to start with one thing that never changes, and that's history. Because once you understand how midterms actually work, everything happening right now makes a lot more sense. So let's put real history behind this, because the pattern isn't subtle and it isn't new. It must be understood. We have to break the pattern. MAGA conservatives and Republicans, we need to show up in 2026. No fucking exceptions. The success of Donald Trump's presidency is depending on us. It's depending on these midterms. Midterms are historically hard on the president's political party. Let's change that. Since World War II, the party that controls the White House has lost U.S. House seats in nearly every single midterm election. Not once or twice, decades of elections. The exceptions they're rare and usually tied to an extraordinary national event. And the thing that we have on our side is that Donald Trump is an extraordinary national figure. So in 1946, President Truman's party had lost 55 House seats. In 1966, Johnson's party lost 47. In 1994, Bill Clinton's party lost 54. In 2010, Obama lost 63, which was the biggest midterm swing in modern history. And in 2018, Trump lost 40 seats. These are all different decades, different presidents with the same outcome. This is not a coincidence, it's a voter's behavior. Midterms function as a pressure valve. So voters who supported a president or simply tolerated one use the midterms to slow things down. They rebalance the power. They shift committees. They change what legislation can pass and what can never even reach the freaking floor. And the key point is that this happens regardless of approval ratings. Presidents can be popular and still lose seats. They can be controversial and lose more. What drives the outcome isn't just opinion, it's turnout imbalance, and we have to show up. Presidential elections bring out casual voters. Midterms don't. That means elections are decided by the people who are motivated, organized, and they're paying attention. Historically, when one side shows up more consistently in midterms, they win seats even in districts that leaned the other way just 2 years earlier. And this is how supposedly safe seats flip. This isn't a theory, and we're seeing it again. Right now in 2026, recent special elections and off-cycle races have shown that low turnout environments reward the side with freaking energy. Not the side with the bigger margin, but districts that carried comfortably in presidential years are suddenly competitive because fewer voters are participating. And that's why midterms are dangerous for complacent voters. Conservatives cannot become complacent. Republicans cannot become complacent, or else we're going to lose. Every flip seat compounds. House control determines investigations. It determines the spending bills, impeachment power, and whether an administration governs freely or fights the freaking gridlock. We don't want the gridlock. We don't want Trump to have to be fighting everything he's trying to do. State legislators, they shape the election law in redistricting and the next generation of national candidates. So midterms don't just react to power, they literally reshape it. History is clear. When one side assumes the trend will take care of itself, they fucking lose. When voters decide to, when they decide to wait until the next big election, they wake up to Congress they don't even choose. They wake up to Joe Biden's administration. Midterms are where power quietly changes hands, and history shows us exactly who wins them. The people who show up when fewer people are watching win every single time. And this is where history, it stops being academic and it starts being immediate. Because when you take that midterm pattern and lay it over today's political map, the warning signs get louder. This isn't a cycle filled with blowouts or locked-in outcomes. Political analysis across the entire spectrum are calling this one close, crowded, and competitive. Dozens of House and Senate seats aren't labeled safe in this round of elections. They're sitting in categories like a toss-up and lean, which is analysis language for anything can freaking happen. Margins are thin here. Districts are polarized, as the entire country is. And the difference between holding a seat and losing a seat comes down to turnout, not theory. Get your freaking friends, get out there this year and vote. These midterms are everything. Let's save America. In other words, history is setting the trap, and the map tells us exactly where the freaking trap is laid. So let's talk about why this cycle is especially dangerous for conservatives who assume the numbers will hold on their own. Because when you drill down on the map, it gets even clearer how fragile the balance really is. Right now, race ratings show a political landscape that is a toss-up across the board, not just in one region and not just one chamber. House and Senate districts that were once treated as reliable are now being labeled as toss-up or lean, and that label exists for only one reason. The turnout decides the outcome. A toss-up seat, it's not about ideology shifting overnight. It's about margin shrinking. It's about fewer voters participating. It's about one side organizing early while the other side assumes fundamentals will save them. They think, yeah, we already won the presidency, we're going to win again. Let's not think that way. The part that conservatives need to really hear clearly is a lean is not a lock. Analysts use words like, lean Republican or lean Democrat to describe probability, not protection. Those seats flip every cycle when enthusiasm drops. Messaging goes quiet, Voters, they decide to tune out because they think that the results are already baked in. It never is. In close cycles like this one, control of Congress doesn't come down to landslides. It comes down to a few thousand voters here, a few precincts there, a handful of districts most people don't even know the freaking names of. And when turnout is low, as it always is in the midterms, those small gaps, they matter even more, and they make up an even bigger difference in voter blocks. That's why conservatives can't afford to coast this year. We don't hold, competitive seats by assuming the map favors us. We hold them by showing up early, standing engaged, and driving turnout in races that don't feel dramatic but decide everything. Because once a seat flips, the consequences are immediate. Committees change, the agenda changes, and the balance of power shifts, and that's no theory. When the votes that determine what moves forward and what gets blocked are on the other side of the aisle, we all know what happens, and we don't want this to happen to our president. This map isn't forgiving. It doesn't reward complacency. It rewards discipline. And in a cycle that's this tight, the side that treats every competitive seat like it's already lost and fights accordingly is the side that usually wins. And that's the reality of the 2026 landscape. Momentum doesn't wait for the election day. Before a single ballot is ever cast in November, the battle is already underway in places most voters ignore. Local races, special elections, and off-cycle contests that barely make the news. These are low turnout elections by design, and that's exactly why they matter. Because when one side shows up consistently in those quiet races, they don't just win seats, they build infrastructure, confidence, and they give the narrative power that carries straight into the midterms. The momentum Democrats have been quietly stacking heading into 2026, that's the kind of momentum that's going to win these quiet races. They're laying the groundwork. And over the past year, the Democrats have notched some real wins in special elections because of it, and also in off-cycle contests like the state legislative seats and city councils or local executive seats. These are the kind of races that usually fly under the radar, but these elections, they draw lower turnout, and that means outcomes are driven less by the broad public opinion and more by organization. And that's the point. When one side shows up in low visibility elections, they're not just picking up a seat here or there, they're building muscle memory. They're training volunteers. They're refining turnout operations. They're testing the messaging. And they're doing it in environments where every door knock or every phone call carries more weight. These wins also fuel narrative momentum, headlines, flow because of the results. Results attract donors, guys, and donors fund field operations, and these field operations boost turnout. That's a feedback loop, and it starts long before the midterms officially begin. If you're watching any kind of liberal news, you see it. They're painting us to be these bad people. ICE, we don't care about America, we're closing down the borders, we're Nazis, and they're trying to take back what they think is American by giving America away to the rest of the world. The danger for conservatives is assuming these races don't matter because they're small. They do matter because they preview what happens when enthusiasm is uneven. Low turnout magnifies discipline. It rewards the side that plans early and punishes the side that waits for a big national movement. This is conservative at the core. The early bird gets the worm. We are hardworking people. We need to put our shit aside and buckle down for these midterms. History backs this up. The party that overperforms in specials or off-cycle elections often enter the midterm with a structural advantage, not because the country has shifted overnight, but because one side has already been running while the other side's still warming up, and Republicans have a problem with this. We need to get the momentum going early and not at the end. That's why this phase of the cycle is so critical. Momentum isn't built in October, it's built now. Race by race, precinct by precinct, when attention it's low, and the effort matters most. If conservatives want to blunt the momentum that the Democrats are coming up with now, then we have to match organization with organization. We have to match their energy with the same energy starting well before November or October or September. We need to start now because the time matters. Because by the time the midterms arrive, momentum isn't something that we can borrow. It's something that we've either built or that we're running against, and momentum only carries you so far when voters themselves start to shift. Because while these organizations and turnout matter, elections are still decided by the people that vote, and right now, some of the ground under some key voters is moving. It's not moving dramatically, but it's moving enough to matter in races where they're razor thin. Conservatives can't afford to ignore shifting voter attitudes and how they can quietly tip, the close races if they're left unanswered. Because in a cycle this tight, small shifts in attitude create really big consequences. Recent polling doesn't show a wholesale rejection of conservative positions, but it does show a softening at the margins, especially along the independents and the swing voters. And in close races, those margins are everything. When the liberal media is painting us as murderers because ICE is shooting people, rightfully so, let's be real. But the way that the liberal media is painting it to these independents and the swing voters that barely watch news but they catch snippets, it's bad for our look. And let's be real about that. And in these close races, the margins are everything. Immigration, it's a clear example. For years, it's been a motivating issue for conservatives and a liability for these Democrats. But polling now suggests that among some independents, the conversation is becoming muddled because of these actions. Not because enforcement suddenly became unpopular, but because attention drifts when the message isn't consistently made. When voters stop hearing clear explanations of policy goals, enforcement rationale, and the real world impacts of that, enthusiasm starts to fade. When they see supposedly innocent civilians in Minneapolis being shot in the face and they don't get the whole story, that's going to persuade them because they are sheep, and we all know this. Fading enthusiasm doesn't always flip votes. Sometimes it keeps people home. That's the danger. In midterms, elections aren't always lost because voters switch sides. They're lost because one side loses urgency. Lower turnout among persuadable conservatives, even by a few points, is enough to swing districts labeled toss-up or lean. Issue priorities also shift. Voters cycle through concerns, economy, inflation, public safety, immigration, and if conservatives don't stay present in those conversations, and these idiot liberals, they fill that gap, The silence creates space, and space gets occupied. We cannot open space for these liberals to occupy. That's why messaging matters so much as policy. As Donald Trump is rolling out new policy, the messaging on this matters, and the media knows this, and they take advantage of it to the people who don't think for themselves. When voters don't hear a confident, disciplined case for conservative positions, uncertainty will always creep in. When uncertainty creeps in, then their motivation drops. And when motivation drops in a midterm election, the result is predictable. Close districts don't forgive disengagement. So this isn't panicking over the polls. It's about understanding what polls are really measuring. It's attention, confidence, and enthusiasm. Those are variables conservatives can control, but only if we engage early and consistently. In a midterm cycle defined by narrow margins, every soft voter matters. Every conversation matters, and every skipped election matters. Because when attitudes shift just enough, the turnout slips just enough. That's all it takes to tip a key race the wrong way. And this is where the conversation has to widen, because elections aren't won by base energy alone. In a midterm cycle like this one, enthusiasm matters, organization matters, messaging matters, but not if it exists in some kind of vacuum between us. Between the two sides sits a group, and they quietly decide the outcomes of this country. They are the swing voters. They don't attend rallies. They don't argue online. They don't live inside of a political bubble like we do. But when the margins are this thin, they are the key factor. They are the determining factor. They become the deciding factor of the race. And conservatives have to confront this head on. Midterms are won by persuading, not just by mobilizing, because when you look at how midterms are actually decided, the data tells a very consistent story. Study after study shows that base turnout alone doesn't win midterms. I keep saying it. It keeps you competitive, but it doesn't carry you across the line in these close races. The deciding factor is almost always swing voters and moderates, because you don't vote reflexivity. You don't identify strongly with either party. If you're a moderate or a swing voter, you make decisions late based on your trust and your feelings and your tone and the perceived competence of the politician that you're voting for. These voters aren't ideological warriors. They're pragmatic. They're looking for stability. They're weighing who seems serious and who seems grounded and who sounds like they're actually focused on governing rather than the posturing. And obviously they're more interested in the positions that they support based off of, which candidate falls in line with those. The critical point is swing voters are overrepresented in midterms. So presidential elections pull in low information and infrequent voters when midterms don't. That means that the electorate skews older, more attentive, and more moderate. The people who show up are the ones who are paying at least some attention. And these voters, they're persuadable. And that's why tone and clarity matter so much in these cycles. They don't win swing voters by yelling louder. They win them by making a coherent case in the economy, public safety, border enforcement, education, and basic competence. You win them by showing that conservative policy isn't about chaos or extremes, but about order, accountability, and results driven. Mobilization matters, but it has to expand outward. If conservatives focus only on firing up the base, then we're capping our ceiling. If we combine base turnout with intentional outreach to these moderates and these independent swing voters, then we're expanding the map, and that's how seats are defended, and that's how districts are flipped the right way, to the right side. This is especially true in competitive districts when elections are, decided by just a few points or a few thousand votes. In those races, winning over a small share of undecided or moderate voters can outweigh massive online enthusiasm that never turns into ballots. Midterms reward persuasion. They reward candidates and movements that can speak beyond their own echo chamber and present themselves as the adult in the room. And they punish parties that confuse volume for reach. So conservatives, if we want to win in 2026, the mission, it's clear. Turn out the base. Yes, but don't stop there. Engage the persuadable. Make the case. Earn their trust. Because in elections this close, swing voters don't just matter. They fucking decide everything, guys. And when you put all of it together in these tight races, the shifting attitudes, the persuadable voters, it leads to one unavoidable truth. In midterms, every single vote carries more weight than in a presidential election. So this isn't a presidential year with massive crowds and automatic turnout, guys. This is a smaller electorate. This is the quieter cycle and the battlefield where participation itself becomes the deciding force. Conservatives cannot afford to underestimate midterms are won by the people who actually show up, because the math of midterms changes everything. Midterm elections don't bring out the crowds that presidential years do. Turnout always drops, sometimes super sharply. And when fewer people vote, each vote matters more, not symbolically, practically, mathematically. In a presidential election, millions of ballots can dilute the impact of any single vote. In a midterm, especially in competitive districts, races are decided by hundreds or even thousands of votes, not tens of thousands. That's not a theory, that's the historical record here. And that's why a smaller mobilized voting bloc can have an outsized impact. When one side shows up consistently and the other side assumes the outcome is already decided, the results always flip. Not because public opinion changed dramatically, but because participation did. And I'm just going to drill on this. This applies everywhere. Congressional races, state legislatures, local offices that control election law and redistricting and policy implementation that affect you, the listener, directly. Your local environment. Get out there and make a change, make an impact, and tell your neighbors to, and like-minded people. Let's start talking about this. Let's get this conversation going early so we can have the correct outcome in the end. These aren't abstract outcomes. These votes shape the laws that are passed, which bills get hearings, which budgets are written, what policies actually get enforced. Showing up doesn't just register your opinion, it directly shapes the governance that you live under. That's why conservatives can't afford to treat midterms as some kind of optional or secondary voting thing. If you believe in limited government and law and order, economic stability, or constitutional boundaries, midterms are where the principles are either defended or quietly surrendered to these fucking liberals. And when conservative voters show up, they don't just influence races, they set the direction of the country. They determine whether power is concentrated or if it's fucking checked, whether agendas accelerate or they stall. Whether institutions reflect voters or activist minorities that these billionaires are paying to have their agendas pushed. Low turnout doesn't mean low consequences, it means higher stakes per vote. Midterms reward discipline, guys. They reward commitment. They reward people who understand that civic responsibility doesn't pause just because the spotlight isn't as bright. And in a cycle this close, with margins this thin, showing up isn't just participation, it's leverage. That's the reality of the midterm elections. Conservatives who understand that and act on it are the ones who decide what the country looks like after the votes are counted. And when you step back and look at all of this together, the history, the tight map, the off-cycle momentum, the shifting attitudes, swing voters, and the, turnout math, it leads to one unavoidable conclusion: that nothing about 2026 is going to be automatic. These midterms are not guaranteed to either side. It's not guaranteed to them either. But we want to make sure that we're pushing the ball in the right direction. What we're seeing, instead of a convergence of factors that all point in the same direction, is outcome will be decided by engagement and not assumptions. That's the central point. In a cycle this competitive, conservative turnout isn't just important, it's decisive. And it doesn't start in October, it starts now. with conservatives, with you, with me, with organization, with our neighbors, talking to neighbors, and voters being energized long before Election Day shows up on the calendar. Momentum isn't something you flip in the last minute. It's built quietly and early, and it's built deliberately, because in midterms, every vote carries more weight. Every district matters more. And every side that understands that and acts on it first usually controls what comes next. That's the reality of 2026. When you strip that away, you strip away the noise, you strip away all the bullshit, the truth is staring everyone right in the face. The 2026 midterms, they're not locked in. They're not locked in for Republicans, and it's not locked in for Democrats. History tells us that power is constantly shifting in the midterms. The current map tells us margins are very thin for us, so we need to get to work. Off-cycle elections tell us one side already practicing turnout is the one who wins. The polling tells us that voter attention and enthusiasm are not fixed, that they're fluid, that just because we won the presidency does not mean that we are guaranteed to win the midterms. Just because we see liberals acting like idiots on TV every single day does not mean that conservatives are going to show up to vote unless we make it happen. All the leads that we have, all the information that we have, it points in the same direction. It points to the same conclusion. Conservative turnout is the variable that will decide this cycle. And it's not something you can manufacture at the last minute. Turnout is going to be built on campaign ads. It's going to be built on conversations around the kitchen table. It's going to be built by you talking to your neighbors. It's going to be built by people reminding each other that these races matter even when they don't dominate the fucking headlines. It's built when voters feel engagement early, not lectured late. That's how Republicans hold seats that, look shaky on paper. That's how we flip seats everyone else is going to ride off. That's how we control the direction of Congress and state governments when the margins are this tight, because in midterms, every vote carries more weight. Just remember that. Write it down. Take a picture. Please remember, every vote carries more weight this year. Fewer participants means every vote matters more. That's not a flaw in the system. It's just the reality that we're living in. Momentum doesn't start on Election Day. By then, it's already visible. It's already measurable. It's already baked into the turnout operations, the volunteer lists, and the voter expectations. The side that starts early sets the tone. The side that waits, reacts to what the other side is doing, is the side that loses. So the central point couldn't be clearer. If conservatives want to regain ground, expand influence, and actually govern, the work starts now, not next year, not in 6 months, not right before the election. It starts now. Because midterms aren't won by those who complain the loudest, which is our competition. That's all they do. Midterms are won by those who show up first and keep showing up until the last ballot is cast. And that's where we land today. Not on panic, not on predictions, but on responsibility. Responsibility of me, responsibility of you, responsibility of this movement to move forward, to govern this country and bring us to a better place. Everything we've talked about, the history, the map, the momentum, the voters, the turnout, it all points in the same direction. The future isn't decided by these fucking idiot headlines, these liberals that are constantly causing chaos. Everything is decided by participation. This isn't about one race or one cycle. It's about whether conservatives stay engaged when the spotlight fades, when elections feel smaller, and when showing up feels optional. It isn't. So as we close this out, remember this: power doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes quietly when people stop paying attention. And it's secured the same way by people who don't. That's where we leave it today, because the work doesn't end with this episode. It starts after. That's what the show is really about, not chasing outrage and not feeding fear. It's not pretending the work ends when the microphone turns off. It's about clarity. It's about understanding how power actually moves and recognizing when it's your turn to carry some of the weight. And right now, it's our turn. So get your fucking rucksacks on and fill them up with responsibility, and let's start getting to it. If you want to stay connected to that mission beyond this episode, make sure you're plugged into 4547blog.com. That's where the conversation continues. Articles, analysis, and coverage that doesn't bend into narratives or chase clicks. You'll also find 4547 Blogazine. It's our long format publication built for readers who want depth, not sound bites. No censorship, no apologies, just real reporting and commentary you won't get anywhere else. And while you're there, check out 4547 Blog's conservative apparel line. We have gear that actually represents what we believe in. No slogans written by some focus group, just clean designs, strong messages, and, support for independent conservative media. Supporting this platform is how this stays independent. If you've been listening to this episode, you already know the stakes. You know history doesn't repeat itself by accident. You know momentum doesn't build on its own. And you know silence and disengagement are decisions, whether people like to admit it or not. So take this with you when you leave today. Showing up matters, especially when fewer people do it. Talking matters. Sharing matters. Staying engaged when it's inconvenient, it matters the most of all. This isn't about perfection, it's about participation. That's why we do this show. To cut through the noise, to focus on what actually shapes outcomes, and to remind you that the country doesn't move on autopilot. It moves because people decide to move it. People like you and people like me. Thanks for spending your time with us. This has been the New Conservative Radio Show. I'm NINJ. Visit 4547blog.com. Read the blogazine. Rep the conservative apparel proudly. We'll be back next time breaking it down, keeping it real, and staying focused on what actually matters. Until then, stay sharp, stay engaged, and don't sit this one out. Please. We'll see you next time.